Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to be talking about hand green for the second time on this channel. Um, this was my very first deck tech video. It is, as you know, my favorite deck, and but it was almost 2 months ago, and um, in the meantime, there's been a lot of changes to the meta. I've obviously involved my thinking on how to improve the deck, and this is the latest improvement that I've made to the list, and that's the deck I'm going to be bringing to the Top Cut Take the Initiative tournament for Season 2, since I managed to qualify in the top 16. So I'll be able to test my involvement in the deck. I've already made, of course, some changes previously, but I feel like I've made a significant amount of changes this time around, and I would like to show you what it's all about. So what are those changes and the reason why I made those changes. So going on first, so on if you want to know more about the fundamentals of the list and the basics of how I run the deck, I encourage you to go back to the original videos, which explains all the fundamentals, and I will put the video on the comments below, and then I will then come back to this video where I'm going to talk more in details about the latest changes and how I run the list into the newest different deck. Before I start, I would like to thank everybody who's subscribed or who've basically requested for the coaching lessons. This was way more successful than I thought. I'm almost fully booked out for next week, and I'm already starting getting bookings for the week after. So super happy about this. I was not expecting this to be so successful. So thank you very much for everybody who is supporting my work through this coaching program that I have. If you want to know more about the coaching program, I'll put the link in the comment in the in the description as well. So without further ado, let's go into this. So as you can see, the big elephant in the room is that I no longer run Mon Mothma. So I used to run 3 Mon Mothma as a 2-drop, and I decided to remove them completely. Uh, and the reason why I removed Mon Mothma is because I realized that the card was only really good against control, and in most of the matchups she was simply too slow. And I realized that in most cases you don't really need the card draw, especially when you play a unit that is a 1/3 body that is almost completely pointless. Um, so she's very useful into control because she gives you like something to do that allows you to fetch for your important cards, and she gives you a body that's allow you to play around Power of the Dark Side, and all that is very useful. But she was basically pointless in all the other matchups. So my first thinking process was to put her in a sideboard, but then I realized that in the sideboard I have better things to play against control specifically. So she ended up being completely removed out of the list. Another thing that was very annoying with Mon Mothma is that because she was in the deck, I had to keep a certain amount of rebels in the deck. I had to reach this critical mass of rebels that I needed to make her relatively consistent. Now that she's not here anymore, I don't have to worry about this, which means that there's other changes that I can make. I can reduce the amount of rebels and instead play non-rebel cards that I think are more powerful, or at least more useful for what I'm trying to do. Mon Mothma had a tendency to sometimes miss, where I would basically see 5 cards and not find a single rebel, which would put me in a very bad spot when that happened. So also the other risk of Mon Mothma completely fizzling was another very big problem. And now that she's gone, I don't have to worry about this anymore, especially after sideboarding. Sometimes I would take up some rebels to include some non-rebels instead, and I don't have to worry about this anymore, which I think is a big relief. I really like her, but there are simply just too few matchups in which she was very useful, and I ended up just not playing her that much. So I took her off completely off the list. Um, so as you can see, this gives me like a lot of room. So I've also removed the Syndicate Lackeys from the main deck. I think I still really like Syndicate Lackeys, but I found some more room to find some other stuff instead. And I've also removed two Admiral Akbars. I used to run 3, now I only run 1. I think Admiral Akbars is very strong out of U-Wing reinforcements, but without U-Wing, just as a regular card, I find it very difficult to use. There's just not that many scenarios where I can reliably kill something with him. And now that I don't have Mon Mothma anymore, one of the big motivations for me to have Akbar at the first place was to once again have a lot of rebels in the deck. But now that Mon Mothma is not here anymore, I don't really need that many rebels in the deck, so I can remove the rebels that I found the least useful, and Akbar is definitely one of them. It's still very good in the U-Wing reinforcement, that's why I still have one as part of the U-Wing toolbox. So with all that room being made, I was able to place 3 Spark of Rebellion in the main deck. So Spark of Rebellion is a card that I think is incredibly useful in 2 matchups. And the first matchup is the Boba matchup. Obviously, Han has a weak matchup against Boba. We all know that. And in order to improve the matchup, I've decided to play the Spark of Rebellion in the main deck. This is very powerful because if you open up versus Boba with a Spark of Rebellion and you decide to take out a ramp, you can remove the resupply, or sometimes you can remove the Super Laser Technician. It makes it very difficult for the Boba deck to ramp. And if Boba cannot ramp, the deck is significantly weaker. So another thing you can do as well is if you're not going to be playing a ground unit on turn 2, you can basically go open up Spark of Rebellion. If your opponent has both a resupply and a Super Laser Technician, you can take off the resupply, and then on turn 2, if he plays a Super Laser Technician, then you simply don't play any ground units, and then the Super Laser Technician cannot be cracked, and if he cannot be cracked, once again, no ramp. This gives you an opportunity to... So basically the ideal opening versus against the Boba is turn 1 Spark of Rebellion, turn 2 resupply. Spark of Rebellion is also useful later on in the game. One turn before the hand turn, you can go Spark of Rebellion, you can remove something that can be very annoying, you can remove No Good to Me Dead, Overwhelming Barrage, or other card that can one-shot Han Solo. And if Han Solo cannot be one-shot, then you can go for the double ramp. You can go for the double ramp Han Solo and play early U-Wing reinforcement and put yourself very far ahead. So Spark of Rebellion is just incredible. Even in later stage of the game, being able to get rid of a Fire Spray or a Vader is very useful. So it's really a card that I think is extremely powerful. I'm not a big fan of including non-units in a U-Wing reinforcement deck, because the more non-unit you play, the less useful U-Wing reinforcement becomes. But in this case, I still have a critical mass of units that I think is fine. And I really find the Spark of Rebellion just too useful in this matchup to be ignored. The other thing that I really like about Spark of Rebellion is like it's very good versus control. And obviously we've seen the emergence of all those super hard control decks that play, of course, that rely a lot on Super Laser Blast. And I think one of the big reasons why Han Green has a good matchup versus those decks is because you get those main decks Spark of Rebellion that allow you to get rid of the Super Laser Blasts, allow you to get rid of the big removals, and really helps tremendously in this matchup. Overall, in all late game matchups, Spark of Rebellion is going to be very useful. And even against Agro, it's not completely useless. If against Agro, it's something that I most likely will advise to play later on in the game to get rid of the K2SO, get rid of the For a Cause I believe in, those kind of cards that can be very useful. So yeah, Spark of Rebellion has just been an absolutely amazing card for me, and I don't think I'm going to be going any lower than 3 anytime soon. The other card that I've decided to include is a third copy of Greedo. Third copy is Greedo has made this deck better in 2 ways. The first way is like it gives more consistent early game turn versus Agro. So versus Agro, sometimes the problem is if you don't have a turn 1 play, or if your turn 1 play is just an Echo-based defender that requires you to use your hand ability to be played, it's not always a great matchup. It doesn't feel great to trade Echo-based defender for a Battlefield Marine when you had to use a hand's ability to be able to play that Echo-based defender. So I wanted to have more consistent good turn 1 play versus Agro, and that's why I decided to have the third copy of Greedo. So that gives us 3 Battlefield Marine, 3 Greedos, And obviously there are other things we can play on turn 1. We can also play Minion Falcon on turn 1 if your opponent is going for a space start or something like this. We can still go, of course, turn 1 Leia, untap resources, play a Greedo, so for the double turn 1 play. But yeah, basically also turn 1 Spark of Rebellion, if you are the first player, sometimes can be good against aggro. It's risky though, but sometimes you don't have really much of a choice. But yeah, basically I wanted to have a more consistent turn 1 play versus aggro, and Greedo is a good one. Another thing that I really like about Greedo is like it makes U-wing reinforcement so much better because it helps you basically filling the gap, because very often it happens that you get 2-3 drops. So whenever you're gonna grab 2-3 drops, you're very happy to get a Greedo to get into 7 resources. And obviously with Rogue Squadron Skirmisher, you can put a Greedo alongside Rogue Skirmisher. So it makes the U-wing better, and it makes it for a more consistent play against aggro, which I think is very useful. A big thing that I realized playing the deck is that I've realized that our matchup against aggro was not as good as I thought it was. I feel like maybe I was not playing against the right aggro decks, or maybe the aggro list have evolved, or maybe people have become better at playing aggro, but I really had a very good experience against aggro playing this deck early on, but then lately I've realized that the matchup was not as good as I thought it was. Basically, one of the big difficulty with the deck is that you don't play a lot of removal events. You are playing, you basically kill units using your own units, pretty much, with units that have ambush. And the problem with this is that if your opponent goes space, and you don't have space units, and you don't have space answers, you're going to get overrun in space, you're going to lose. Or the other way around, if your opponent goes ground and you don't have answers on the ground, does not happen as often, but it can happen as well, then you can get overrun on the ground. So you have to have the answers matching what the opponent is doing. And I realized that especially in space, I was very vulnerable because I was relying almost exclusively on Falcon and Bright Hope to basically safeguard the space arena. And when it goes full space, it was not always possible to stabilize. If I don't draw a Falcon, it was very tricky. So I've decided to reinforce my space arena by playing 2 Azurit Liberator Gunship. For people who don't know the card, it's a 3/4 for 4 with ambush. The reason why this card doesn't see much play is because, first of all, yellow-white is not really that popular as a color combination, but also because people usually prefer the Falcon. And yes, Falcon is a better card, but once you already have 3 Falcons and you want more space interactions, then Gunship is the next best thing. And Gunship is really, really powerful. It's very powerful. It's very close to TIE Interceptor. Imperial Interceptor is played absolutely everywhere. Everywhere where you're going to see people playing black and red, you're going to see Imperial Interceptor being played because it's such a great answer in space as well as putting a threat. It's just really, really solid. So, and Liberator Gunship is almost as good. It's in some situations it's even better. So personally, I think that this card is very underplayed, and once again, it's underplayed because it literally is a less good version of Falcon, and so people prefer to play Falcon most of the time. But there's really no shame in running this card if you already have 3 Falcons. It really is the best thing you can play in space. And basically, I feel like since I've been starting to playing this card, I've started really seeing the aggro matchup being much better, because now on the ground, obviously we have all of our ambush unit, we have our Rogue Squadron Skirmishers, the Han Solo, the Battlefield Marine, the Greedos, that really operates very well on the ground, and then we have the space arena now that is well covered by Falcon, Bright Hope, and Gunship. So it really has improved the aggro matchup substantially. So this has been my really big answer versus aggro, because sometimes I was just being overrun in space. So another little cute card is I'm also running 1 Patrol Reviewing, which is a card that I actually rated D tier in my card tier list. And basically, so for people who don't know the card, it's a 1/1 for 2 vehicle that basically draws you a card when you play it. So it is quite similar to Mon Mothma in a sense that it's a 2-drop that draws you a card. But the difference with Mon Mothma is like it's unconditional. You draw the card. You don't have a chance to miss by looking at the top 5. So it is basically my replacement for Mon Mothma, pretty much. So obviously it's not as good as Mon Mothma. Mon Mothma is a 1/3. and Mon Mothma can be bounced by Bright Hope to draw a card, which is a big deal. So yeah, it's not ideal, but in a lot of cases it just does the job, as well as Mon Mothma, and at least it draws me a card every time, and I'm not constrained to having running a bunch of rebels in my deck to make it work. Another cool thing about V-Wing is that it's a vehicle, which matters for prepare to take off, which we'll talk about later. So another thing as well is that I like about V-Wing is simply another card from the toolbox of U-Wing reinforcements. Sometimes there are actually quite a few situations where, especially in late game, when I'm kind of low in cards, where I would rather put a 1/1 and draw a card with V-Wing rather than putting a 3/3 on the board. So yeah, we all agree that Battlefield Marine early on in the game is far better than V-Wing, but in later stage situations, I actually like Patrol Wing from the U-Wing, getting a Patrol Wing from the U-Wing reinforcement, because getting a 1/1 and drawing a card in that context can be better than putting a 3/3. So it's a situational card, and as part it's only as a one-of, but I think there's a few situations where it's actually quite good, especially against control, as it basically performs the same job as Power of the Dark Side, as Mon Mothma, as it absorbs Power of the Dark Side and adds an initial body on the board. So outside of that, this is basically the only changes I've made to the main deck. Now let's talk about the change to the sideboards. So basically for the sideboards, I've realized that the Yularans, even though they are quite good in late game versus aggro, out of U-Wing reinforcement, I thought that even against aggro they were a little bit too specialized. So they were not really performing the job the way they had. Putting the Spark of Rebellion into the main deck instead of the sideboard gave me a lot of space to run other cards. Among those cards, we have the Syndicate Lackeys, which are really good against aggro, as they can one-shot Sabine without dying, and also quite good against Boba, as they can kill the Boba Disintegrator without dying as well. So they're decent. They're pretty good against aggro, and they're quite decent against Boba. So they're kind of flexible cards that I can, every time I'm taking out a card, like for example, if I'm running in someone who runs a lot of anti-upgrade, I can take out the Traitorous, and then I can replace it by a decent 5-drop to replace it, and Lackeys is going to be that 5-drop. I also added a nice anti-control package, and my anti-control package is Body Rook and Prepare to Take Off, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So without further ado, let's go into the sideboard plan, my updated sideboard plan versus aggro. So as you can see here, I'm running against aggro. I'm going to add 2 Syndicate Lackeys, 2 Reinforcement Walker, and 1 Azotuk Liberator Gunship. And so the Syndicate Lackeys, as I said earlier, is very good. It's basically comes into play, kill something, and then gives you a body that can either race or kill another thing. It's just a very solid card against aggro. Most importantly, it does one-shot Sabine without dying, which I think is a big deal. Next, we got Azotuk Liberator Gunship, once again the 3rd copy, just to have more space presence. And the Reinforcement Walker is, yes, it's very late game, but obviously we have a deck that is able to ramp quite a bit. And the main asset of Walker is its ability to heal us and put us outside of range of 4 cause I believe in, which can be very useful. It is better than Om1 because Om1, yes, it can heal more on the long run, but what we need when we get to that point in the game is to heal a lot just to put ourselves out of range of 4 cause I believe in. So Walker is just perform a little bit better than Om1. I still decided to keep 1 Om1, so instead of going for all 3 Walkers replacing all 3 Om1s, I just do a 2-2, and the reason I do this is because there are going to be some situation where Om1 is going to be better. For example, if I need to reanimate, for example, a blocker on the ground, like I forgot the name, like the Echo-based Defender, for example. So there's still a few cases where I like Om1 better, but overall I prefer Walker, so that's why I went for a 2-1 split. I take off Petroleum V-Wing, which is really not a card that is pretty horrible against aggro. I remove one of the Spark of Rebellion. Spark of Rebellion is fine as a late game card to get rid of 4 cards I believe in, but you don't need 3 of them. And then Vanguard Ace. Vanguard Ace is a really cool card and does make U-Wing reinforcement a lot better, but I think against aggro, it's really not a bad card against aggro, but I just feel like it's once again it's a little bit situational, And if you don't really know what to remove, removing the Vanguard Ace is a fine choice because at the end of the day, it remains a relatively situation card, even though it is very powerful at what it does. Against Boba, I'm almost pre-sided versus Boba. That's why because it is our weakest matchup, so that's why I pretty much just pre-side against Boba most of the time. So the only thing I add is Syndicate Lackeys, which is okay against Boba. It's not amazing. It's really good against Boba Executor, kill Boba Executor without dying, which is nice. But it's not like if Syndicate Lackeys was like amazing versus Boba, I would just put it in the main deck because I think if you ever find a card that is amazing versus Boba, you should put it in the main deck, in my opinion. With all that being said, it does improve the match. It is definitely decent and it is better than Petrol Wing and Gunship, so this is why I make the swap here. But as I said, I mostly try to preset versus Boba because it is our weakest matchup. It is also one of the most played deck in the game, so obviously you need to kind of be prepared for it. Moving on for the control matchup, as you can see, we are making quite a few changes to the deck. So obviously, the Liberator Gunship, not really useful. I mean, it can be fine if your opponent plays like, I forgot the name, Inferno 4. So it just comes in, kill an Inferno 4, it's fine. But, so if you're playing and someone plays Inferno 4, maybe you would want to take out some Leia instead of taking the gunship. Leia is, I keep Leia as a one-of because it's a nice thing to grab from U-Wing reinforcements, and you can like kind of tap out in super late game. You tap out like a Vader, or you tap out I forgot the name, an Avenger that can be very good. So this is kind of nice. But you don't need 3 of them. Those are mostly cards that are meant to be managing enemy units, so you don't want them to be against control most of the time. Same for Akbar, especially since Akbar really calls small unit. Once again, there's an argument of keeping the Akbar in the deck if your opponent plays like a Stormtrooper. So against control, the difficulty against control is like there's as many versions of control as there's control players. So this is definitely not like a sideboard plan that is going to work for everybody. Make some changes depending on what kind of control deck you're playing against. That's for sure. I'll also remove most likely the Traitorous, simply because there's not a lot of strong 3-drop that you can steal. Once again, if that's most likely true if you're running against a full control version. If you're running against a more control mid-rangey green control deck like Iden Green or Krennic Green, then Traitorous becomes a lot better. So it really depends on the case. And it also depends if your opponent happens to be playing some upgrade removal as well. So what do we add in this matchup? So obviously we add more walkers. Walkers are very strong in grindy matchups. Huge body, immediate value, and if it's not killed, it just brings more and more value. Just a obviously great card in all grindy matchups. Body Rook is my latest addition for the control matchup. It's very good, especially against unit-less control. So those decks will rely on Super Laser Blast, rely on those expensive events to stabilize the game. Super Laser Blast is one of the cards that we fear the most in the hand deck because we are all about investing the board. And the fact that you can play Body Rogue off U-Wing Reinforcement without paying the aspect penalty, so you can play this card from U-Wing Reinforcement without, as a 3-drop, essentially, is extremely powerful because what you're going to do is you're going to play 3-drops and then you're going to play something like maybe a Battlefield Marine and a Vanguard Ace, so you're going to put like a lot of stats on the board. You're basically putting 10 stats worth of units on the board, and then you can look at your opponent's hand and remove the Super Laser Blast, and suddenly it becomes very difficult for the opponent to manage all those cards. So it's just an excellent card that I would advise. It's one of the best cards, and even for 5 resources, if you just play it and just normally, it's not really that big of a deal to pay the aspect penalty when you're running against a control deck. So putting a body on the board and removing like an important removal is just extremely powerful. Then, last but not least, we got 2 copies of Prepare to Take Off. So something I've realized when I made all those changes to my deck is like I've added a lot of vehicles. I've added the gunship, I had the V-Wings, I had so a lot of new vehicles, and even after sideboard, we're adding the 3 reinforcement walkers. So it makes it so we have really a lot of vehicles, and it turns out that some of the best card against control that we have access to are vehicles. Like if you think about it, what are the best card that you have against Han? Well, the best cards are Falcon, Walkers, and Oman. Those are really some of the best card against control. Uh, Obviously, Falcon is great. Immediate impact on the board, can attack right away, deal damage. Resilient to entrench. If opponent plays entrench on the Falcon, we can bounce it back into our hand, play it back again, deal damage. Very, very effective. Home one is not only the huge threat, but also brings back Falcon. So basically every copy of Home one is an extra copy of Falcon in the control matchup. And then of course Walker comes to play, huge body, difficult to deal with, and draws you a card at the same time. So all those cards are just excellent versus control. And obviously Prepare to Take Off allows us to grab those cards. It digs relatively deep, up to 8 cards, and grabs us up to 2 vehicles units. That's just extremely effective. So this is currently my anti-sideboard control. And obviously every control is a bit different, so might require some changes depending on the situation. But this is currently what I'm running. So sorry. So now going back into I wanted to do a special section because there's a lot of people who ask me why you don't run this card, why you don't run that card, why you don't, and I wanted to take that opportunity to answer those questions. So I made a list of all the cards that a lot of people are thinking about putting in hand green, and I'm just going to explain why I personally don't play this in my own version of hand. So the first card is Alliance Dispatcher. So Alliance Dispatcher sounds like a good idea in the first place. It's cheap, so it's one resources card are very useful with U-wing reinforcements because they are kind of they make U-wing reinforcement more consistent, and it allows us to ramp, which is what the deck is trying to do. The big problem with Dispatcher is that, and we play a lot of units, which makes it so it's going to be able to make most of the stuff cheaper, which is very nice. The problem with Dispatcher is it's too fragile. It's really easy to kill. The reason why Dispatcher is so good in Luke is because you are able to shield it. You can play it on turn 1 and shield it. If you don't have the ability to shield it, this card becomes a lot worse because it's just too vulnerable, it's too easy to deal with. And the problem is that whenever you play this card, your opponent deals it right away, you effectively do cards advantage, and cards advantage whenever you're playing hand is a big problem because you run out of card very quickly because of the ability. Another suggestion that a lot of people make is R2D2, mostly combined with C3PO, so like the combination R2D2 C3PO. So the big argument in favor of R2D2 with C3PO is that they allow you to do cards advantage. So you play R2D2, you look at the top card, you play C3PO, you get to grab that card, and you can draw card over and over again. And being able to draw a lot of cards with hand can be very useful because the more you can do that, the more you can actually get ahead. And one opening that is particularly powerful is that you can play R2D2 and C3PO on turn 1 using Han's ability. So the way that works is you play R2, you look at the card, you keep that card on top, you use Han's ability, and then with 2 resources remaining, you play C3PO and you grab that card. So effectively, you get back the card that you've lost from using Han's ability, and now you have those 2 couples on the board right from turn 1, and you'll be able to start using the combo every turn and start drawing card every turn. So that sounds all cool in theory. There's 2 problems with this. The first problem is, yes, Han needs card draw, but it doesn't need that much card draw, because this is really like a lot of card draw when you get the thing going, which is not something negative, but it's just to say that we don't really need that. The second problem, and a major problem, is that the fact that having to run so many cards that are 1/4 is very bad against aggro. Like, those cards don't help you at all against aggro because they are not able to kill anything at the beginning of the game, which means that you're going to take tons and tons of damage from the opponent turn 1 play without being able to retaliate for a long time, and that's just something you cannot do. So it is just too weak against Agro is the first problem. The second problem, of course, is that you need to draw each of them. Those cards are very strong together, but separate from each other, they become very bad. There are obviously decks where R2D2 can be very strong, but Han Solo is not a deck that can capitalize on a 1/4 body, as other decks can. So those two cards, when they are drawn separately, are simply terrible. And the lack of consistency combined with the fact that they're very bad against aggro means that this is simply just not a great idea in my opinion. Next, we got Shoot First. I've seen people running Shoot First against aggro, and indeed Shoot First is a really strong card against aggro. The problem is, the way I see Han is like most likely Han is a U-Wing deck, and something that is important to always keep in mind whenever you are building a U-Wing deck is that you are, or your most important thing that you're going to do with this deck is playing U-Wing reinforcement for tons of value. And for U-Wing reinforcement to work properly, you need to be running a significant amount of units. So every non-unit card that you're going to be placing in your deck has to be very carefully thought out, because if you run too few units, then you're going to make your U-Wing a lot worse. What makes U-Wing so powerful is the ability to choose among a wide selection of different cards that you can play together and adapt yourself to the current situation. And this is what makes U-Wing so flexible. You won't have that flexibility if you have too few units, and even worse, sometimes you might whiff, or you might have to make suboptimal U-Wings because you just simply run too many events. In my opinion, Shoot First, as good as it is not strong enough to make the cut in the deck. There are a lot more events that I found way more powerful that I would rather play, and I don't think this card is strong enough to justify its spots as an event in the deck. Yes, it's really good against aggro, but I don't think aggro is a particularly bad matchup for Han, and I think there are other cards you can play in order to improve the Han matchups without having to damage your U-Wing reinforcement. So I already talked about the Ezra, the gunship, which I think is also an extremely strong card versus aggro, and at least it's a unit, so it does not disturb your U-Wing. It actually makes it better. Another card in the same vein that people run is Bamboozle in the sideboard as a way to deal with upgrades. I don't think the deck needs tech against upgrade. We already run a Waylay. I think this card has a very similar role than Waylay, except that Waylay is obviously way more flexible. So also in card advantage with Han is very, very bad, so you're almost never going to be using it for free. I mean, if you do, it's just going to be such a big deal. So I don't advise anybody playing Bamboozle, even in the sideboard. I don't. If you really want to deal with upgrades, play Waylay or even play Confiscate. I would rather advise people to play Confiscate than this card. Next we got Frontline Shuttle. So one of the big weaknesses of the deck, as you know, with Han is the fact that Han is very vulnerable to No Good To Me Dead. No Good To Me Dead is a death sentence for Han because not only is it preventing you from ramping, but it also makes it so you won't be able to ramp the turn after. And that is just such a big blow whenever you're playing a Han deck to not be able to do that. So obviously there's plenty of ways you can play around this. But some people have been suggesting, why not running Frontline Shuttle? So then the way that works is Frontline Shuttle is on battlefield, you summon Han, Han gets tapped by No Good To Me Dead, and then you can use Frontline Shuttle to be able to attack with Han anyway, and this way get to ramp. So I personally don't like this deck, and the reason why I don't like it is because I think it's too narrow. Yes, it works very specifically in that situation, but first of all, only one deck really plays No Good To Me Dead, Boba Green, Boba Yellow and Boba Green. Not only that, those decks don't even run in the main deck. A lot of Boba Green, with the presence of control decks more and more that see plays more and more often, you see Boba decks playing less and less No Good To Me Dead. At least in their main deck. So it would be a tech for a sideboard card of your opponent that is not even guaranteed to draw. And not only that, it doesn't help against the 100 other ways Boba can deal with your Han. Boba can deal with your hand with Surprise Strike, with Overwhelming Barrage, with Steadfast Battalion. There's just hundreds of different ways the Boba deck can ruin your hand turn. So in my opinion, simply don't deploy your hand aggressively is, in my opinion, a better counter to those kind of things than playing a Frontline Shuttle, which is only going to deal with one of those million different ways the opponent can deal with it. And obviously, the other problem I have with Frontline Shuttle is that in any other way, it's not a great card. It's very situational. It doesn't help you in the early stage of the game. So I personally don't like this card. I find it just way too situational. I still haven't seen anybody be able to make good use of that card. I think it's extremely inconsistent. So I don't really like it. Next we got Ezra Bridger, which in theory is a great card for Han. It's a card that you can play right from turn 1 thanks to the Han ability. It's a decent body and it does card advantage, which is always great for Han. The problem I have with Ezra is that whenever you run Ezra in a deck that plays a lot of very expensive cards, the Ezra's ability is extremely inconsistent and very difficult to make use of. I've run Ezra a lot in Han because when Han was first spoiled, there was not that many cards in the game, so of course you had to run everything at your disposal, and Ezra was obviously kind of a standard in Han decks back in those days. So I've had the chance to play with this card a lot in Han, and it basically almost never drew me any cards. It's very, very rare that Ezra actually draws you any card, which means that most of the time Ezra is simply going to be a 3-4 for 3, which is, in my opinion, not that impressive. So I don't think I'm not saying that Ezra is unplayable in Han, because 3-4 for 3 is relatively well positioned in the current game, but I personally would rather play a lot of other cards over this personally. Next we got the Fleet Lieutenant. So Fleet Lieutenant is an excellent card, and in my opinion one of the best card in the game, and almost an auto include in almost every white deck. The problem in the context of Han with Fleet Lieutenant is that we simply do not run enough rebels. The deck simply does not run enough rebels for this to be playable. I've tried Han decks that are running a lot of rebels. In my opinion, it is significantly worse. And even if you are running a lot of rebels, still the most important card of your deck, like Falcon, Han, those kind of thing, and especially your leader, are not going to be rebels. So you can try to build a rebel-centric version of Han, but that's not what I chose to do. My version is the opposite of that, almost runs no rebels. So obviously in my specific version, Fleet Lieutenant is not great. However, I don't think it's a bad idea to play Fleet Lieutenant in Han, but you have to be playing a version that plays a lot of rebels for this to work. So Wing Leader, the exact same reason as Fleet Lieutenant, and of course if you could be running a rebel-centric version of Han, then you can definitely run Wing Leader. Rogue Operative, another rebel. I think Rogue Operative is okay. Is a decent card in Han, especially if you're running Energy Conversion Lab, because Rogue Operative is really strong with Energy Conversion Lab. You basically getting out of nowhere, and you can deal something that has 4 health, and even ignore the shield if that unit is shielded. And you can play Rogue Operative on turn 1 using Han's ability, which is neat. So it's not a bad card in Han, but you have to be playing Energy Conversion Lab. Without Energy Conversion Lab, this card is mediocre in my opinion, because then it's very vulnerable. So personally, I do not run Energy Conversion Lab. I would rather have 5 extra HP than having ECL, and I don't think there's enough strong reasons to run an ECL in a Han deck, in my opinion. So I don't run Rogue. Next is Chewbacca. So I've had my fair share of Chewbacca. Actually, in my very first deck tech video about Han, I actually had 2 copies of Chewbacca in there. Chewbacca, I think, is very strong against Agro, unless your opponent happens to be playing a Spectral Soldiers, in which case it doesn't feel as good anymore. But the main problem that I had with Chewbacca was the fact that it's very easy to play around it. What happens is that you run Chewbacca, and then because it's quite an expensive card, you're going to be taking the initiative relatively aggressively after you play Chewbacca. The problem is that once you play the initiative, then you cannot use the ready ability of Chewbacca anymore, because yes, you can ready Chewbacca, but because you've already taken the initiative, you won't be able to attack with your Chewbacca, making the ability pretty much useless. And that is a big problem because then you have to choose between whether you want to pass and take the initiative or take the initiative. And Chewbacca's ability has been very awkward for me to play for that very reason. Very often, as it's just been a 3-6 for 5, which is not exactly good enough in my opinion. So um, he's not terrible, and I still think he's playable in the deck. But I just happen to prefer Syndicate Lackeys as a 5-drop anti-aggro. What I prefer with Syndicate Lackey is that not only Syndicate Lackey is good against aggro, but it's also good against Boba. While Chewbacca is good against aggro, it's not amazing against Boba, in my opinion. So I happen to prefer to run Syndicate Lackeys in this specific slot. Next, we got Steadfast Battalion. So Steadfast Battalion, a lot of people run it in version that plays Energy Conversion Lab, and I think it's not a great idea. And the reason is because it is very difficult to use Steadfast Battalion effectively in a hand deck. So what makes Steadfast Battalion so powerful is the fact that you can summon your leader at 5 and then spend 5 resources, get the syndicate, the battalion for 7 and snipe the opponent leaders or kill something huge, deal tons of damage to base. That's what makes this card good. If you want to replicate this in a hand deck, before you're going to have to Steadfast Battalion, you're going to have to use Hand's ability, which makes you lose an action effectively. And that one action that you're losing by doing this is a big problem. And it makes this combo to be, first of all, it's extremely telegraphed. It's very easy for the opponent to play around it. And it is also extremely awkward to use because you have to spend that extra action to make it happen on the turn that you want it to happen. So it's very awkward to use and it simply doesn't work. I've tried Steadfast Battalion in hand with the ECL. I can guarantee it does not work. And in my opinion, that's one of the big reasons against ECL, is that ECL does not work well in the vast majority of the case. Of course, you can still run a version that plays around ECL, but me personally, I would rather not and get my 5 extra HP from with my base. Another card that I've seen a little bit being run in hand is Lando Calrissian, and basically the argument is, once again, it's another ECL target. Lando can be quite strong with ECL, a 6/5 that comes into play, kill something right away as Saboteur as he goes through a shield, and then the ability to draw a card, well, is very good with the hand, right? The problem is, like, Lando does not really draw you a card. It basically returns resources back into your hand. And the problem is that hand really likes those resources. Unless you're playing Lando in very late game situations, you most likely want to have those cards. You want those resources. You want as many resources as you can. Me personally, when I'm playing Han, I almost never stop resourcing unless I'm really short on cards. I almost never stop resourcing. So for me, the cost of returning resource back into my hand is a massive cost, and is a massive cost. And it's a very situational ability, and very rarely will I want to use that ability. So basically, the cases where Calrissian can be good is that if you've previously resourced very important cards that you would like to get back into your hand. But the problem is, like, this does not really happen that often. Most likely you're going to be resourcing cards that you don't like, that you don't need in a specific matchup. So yeah, basically, first of all, without ECL, this card is not great. And even with ECL, I don't think it's basically just a 6/5 Saboteur. The when playability in a hand deck, you're almost never going to use it. Overall, I'm not a big fan of that card at all. And that's it. That's basically the video. So if you have other questions about the deck, I'm obviously going to be running this deck in the Top Cut tournament, and hopefully I do well with it again. And I'll let you know, of course, how it went with the once the tournament is over. And I'm also going to do a video where I'm going to be reviewing every single deck in the Top Cut. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this was informative. And if you like this content, please like and subscribe. And if you need personalized coaching for anything, give me a shout on Discord and I'll try to find a time slot for you. Thank you so much and see you next time.